The clatter of dishes had become Maria's soundtrack, a symphony of survival that played every night, until her hands cracked and bled. At 23, she should have been finishing college, chasing dreams, building a future. Instead, she was clearing plates at Salvatore's, an upscale Italian restaurant where one meal cost more than she made in a week. Her father's medical bills didn't care about her dreams. Stage 4 cancer didn't negotiate. So Maria smiled through her exhaustion, carried trays that made her shoulders scream, and pretended not to notice when customers looked right through her as if she were just another piece of furniture. She had learned to be invisible. In a place like Salvatore's, invisibility kept you safe. The restaurant attracted a certain clientele, men in expensive suits who spoke in low voices, women dripping in diamonds who barely touched their food, and an unspoken understanding that you didn't ask questions, didn't make eye contact for too long, and definitely didn't draw attention to yourself. Maria had mastered this dance. She moved through the dining room like a ghost, efficient and silent there and not there all at once. But on this particular Tuesday evening, everything changed. The man arrived without a reservation, which should have been impossible. Salvatore's was booked months in advance, yet when he walked through the door, the maitre d' nearly tripped over himself to accommodate him. Maria had seen this before, the subtle shift in the room's energy. The way conversations dropped to whispers, the nervous glances from staff. She kept her head down and focused on clearing table 7, where a couple had barely touched their osso buco. He sat at the center table with 4 other men, all of them carved from the same stone, sharp suits, harder eyes, and an aura that said they owned more than just the space they occupied. They owned the silence, the respect, the fear. Maria had heard whispers about Vincent Castellano, though she'd never seen him in person. He was a legend in this part of the city, a name that carried weight and consequence. The kind of man you didn't want to know, but everyone knew anyway. She wasn't supposed to serve his section. Angela, the senior waitress with 15 years of experience and nerves of steel, handled the important tables. But Angela had called in sick, and now Maria found herself on the edge of something she didn't want to be part of. She kept to the periphery, clearing tables, refilling water glasses, making herself small. That's when she noticed the boy. He couldn't have been more than 10, sitting alone at a corner table near the kitchen doors. His clothes were clean but worn, his hair neatly combed, and his eyes carried something no child should. Loss, fear, uncertainty. He stared at the menu like it was written in a foreign language, his small hands trembling slightly as he held it. Maria watched as he flagged down Marco, one of the servers, and whispered something. Marco's face tightened. He shook his head and walked away. Maria's chest constricted. She knew that look. She'd seen it in her own mirror often enough, the expression of someone trying to hold on to dignity while the world crumbled around them. She glanced toward the kitchen, then back at the boy. Her shift was almost over. Her father would be wondering where she was. She had exactly $23 in her pocket, meant for tomorrow's bus fare and a loaf of bread. She made her choice. Maria approached the boy's table with a gentle smile. Up close, she could see the dirt under his fingernails, the way his jacket sleeves were a little too short, the exhaustion that seemed too heavy for such small shoulders. "Hi there," she said softly. "What would you like to eat?" The boy's eyes widened. I only have $2, he whispered, pulling out crumpled bills from his pocket. "I thought I could get bread, maybe?" "I'm really hungry." Maria's heart cracked clean through. She knelt beside his table. "What's your name?" "Tommy." "Well, Tommy, I think you came to the right place. How about some spaghetti and meatballs? It's the best in the city. I can't afford—" "It's on me," Maria interrupted. "Everyone deserves a good meal, especially someone as brave as you for coming here all by yourself." She didn't wait for his response. She went straight to the kitchen, ordered the meal, and paid for it with her own money. $23 became $0 in an instant. But Tommy's face when the steaming plate arrived made it worth every penny. She watched from across the room as he ate slowly, savoring every bite, and she felt something she hadn't felt in months. Something that felt like purpose beyond just surviving. She was so focused on Tommy that she didn't notice the silence, spreading through the dining room like frost. Didn't see Vincent Castellano watching her. Didn't realize that every move she'd Maid had been observed by eyes that missed nothing. Maria was clearing a nearby table when she heard the scrape of a chair. The room went deadly quiet. She turned to see Vincent Castellano standing, his gaze locked directly on her. Her blood turned to ice. In that silence, she could hear her own heartbeat, wild and terrified. "That girl." His voice cut through the room like a blade. "Now!" Two of his men stood immediately. Maria's hands started shaking. This was it. Whatever she'd done, whatever rule she'd broken by existing too loudly in his space, she was about to pay for it. She thought of her father alone in his hospital bed. Who would take care of him? Who would hold his hand when... "Come here," Vincent said, his expression unreadable. Maria's legs barely worked, but she forced herself forward. Every eye in the restaurant was on her. She stopped a few feet from his table, her head bowed, waiting for judgment. "Look at me," he commanded. She raised her eyes. His face was weathered, scarred, hard as granite, but his eyes weren't cold. They were studying her with an intensity that made her feel transparent. "That boy," Vincent said, gesturing toward Tommy. "You know him?" "No, sir," Maria whispered. "But you bought him dinner." "He was hungry." "With your own money?" It wasn't a question. Maria nodded. Vincent was quiet for a long moment. Then he did something that shocked everyone in the room. He pulled out his wallet and placed $500 bills on the table. "For his meals. However many he needs. You make sure he eats. Every day he comes here, he eats. Understand?" Maria stared at the money, unable to process what was happening. "My son," Vincent said quietly, and for just a second, the armor cracked. "He was 10 when I lost him. 7 years ago. Cancer. I would have given everything I owned for one more meal with him. You saw a hungry kid and you gave what you had. That's rare." He stood and buttoned his jacket. "What's your name?" "Maria." "Maria, you keep showing up here, taking care of people nobody else sees. You keep being who you are." He paused at the door. "And your father's hospital bills? They're taken care of. All of them." He was gone before Maria could speak, leaving her standing there with tears streaming down her face in a room full of witnesses who would never forget what they'd seen. Later, she learned that Vincent had indeed lost his son to cancer, that he'd become a different man after, harder, colder, more dangerous. But for one moment, he'd seen something that reminded him of the person he used to be, the father he still was beneath all the armor. Maria's act of kindness hadn't just fed a hungry boy. It had reminded a broken man that humanity still existed, even in the darkest corners. And sometimes, that's all it takes to change everything. One moment of choosing to see someone, to care, to give what little you have because it's the right thing to do. Tommy came back the next day, and the day after that, Maria made sure he always had a hot meal and a safe place to sit. Vincent kept his word about her father's bills, every single one paid in full. And Maria learned that kindness isn't about what you can afford to give. It's about what you can't afford not to give. In a world that often rewards the ruthless, she'd proven that sometimes the bravest thing you can do is simply be human.